Don't talk down, don't talk up. Talk to them from your heart.
אתה כוכב תקשורת בארצות הברית.
אני מופיע מדי פעם, זה חלק מהעבודה.
איך אתה פרצת?
מפתח רבקה זה לא בגימיקים. אתה צריך להציג את הקייס שלך. אם אתה מאמין בו ואתה אומר את האמת, היא חודרת.
Believe you have something of value to say. The time to start saying it is now.
להתחרות איתך במניפולציה על קהל אני לא יכול. אני מרים ידיים.
למה אתה חושב שהם רובוטים? אתה חושב שהם לא בני אדם עם רגשות? אתה חושב שהם לא מבטאים מה שהם מרגישים?
אתה יודע לנצל אותם היטב ואני לא.
כמה מאנשי התקשורת עדיין אינם מוכנים להשלים עם החלטת הבוחר בבחירות האחרונות. בדמוקרטיה, רק אתם, הבוחרים, רשאים להחליט על דרכה של המדינה.
מה אתם רוצים מהתקשורת? מה אתם רוצים מהתקשורת? בסדר, הבנתי אתכם. אתם רוצים שנפריט את התקשורת. הבנתי.
צריך ראש ממשלה שיעמוד עם כל העולם, לא פראייר. ראש ממשלה מניאק בן זונה צריך.
בנימין נתניהו.
Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist who's taught at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and Yeshiva University here in New York City. It's been about 10 days since a ceasefire was established between Israel and the Palestinian militant group Hamas, the fourth war against Gaza in 12 years. 11 days of fighting saw 4,300 rockets launched at Israel. Israel said it struck more than 1,000 militant targets in Gaza. 12 died in Israel, including 2 children. At least 248 Palestinian civilians were killed, including more than 100 women and children. Israel said it killed at least 245 militants. With the region's complicated history creating one of the world's most intractable conflicts between two traumatized peoples, we turn today to discuss a terrific new documentary by Israeli filmmaker Dan Shadur that examines the life and political activism of Israel's longest-serving prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, often referred to as Bibi. He was born in 1949, a year after Israel's independence, and what Palestinians call the Nakba. Netanyahu has been deeply involved in Israeli politics over the last 4 decades, helping to move Israeli politics firmly to the right. He's been at the center of a policy that has championed Palestinian subjugation, showing little interest in establishing clearly defined, internationally recognized borders or working toward a two-state solution. Many see him as eroding Israel's already fractured democracy by sowing fear and promoting division, creating a toxic relationship with the media, commanding fanatical support, using authoritarian strongman tactics to maintain power as King Bibi, the irreplaceable leader who can keep Israelis safe. The problem itself faces Zionism 7 decades after the birth of the Jewish state. What to do about the other people who inhabit the bitterly contested land remains unanswered. Just 2 days ago, the New York Times announced that an uneasy alliance between a right-wing nationalist and a secular centrist may give Israel new leadership and finally bring Netanyahu's rule to an end. Bibi fought back. Quote, "This is not a unity or democracy. This is an opportunistic government. A government of capitulation, a government of fraud, a government of inertia. A government like this must not be formed." We're thrilled to have on the Radical Imagination today one of Israel's leading filmmakers, Dan Shadur, the director of one of Israel's most viewed documentaries, King Bibi, the life and performances of Benjamin Netanyahu. King Bibi is a powerful polemic, work of history, and portrait of a nation. The story of Netanyahu's rise to power reflected through 4 decades of public speaking appearances and mastery of the art of controlling the narrative of social media. Dan's film is a brilliant tour de force about a man who some see as Israel's savior and others as a cynical politician who will stop at nothing to retain his power. Dan, thank you so very, very much for being here. For our audience's reference, this is the third time we have tried to get this show on, and for obvious reasons, we couldn't the last couple of weeks, and we're just so glad you're safe and the region has calmed down for a while here, and we're able to look at your unbelievably terrific documentary and you report back to us and tell us what's been going on and what do things look like as we open the show here.
Well, thank you, James. Thanks for your patience over there, for waiting for me until we could make it. Very happy to be on the show. Things here are calmed down, but it's it's kind of a tense quietness now. I live in Yafo, which is a mixed city, part of Tel Aviv, but it's a mixed Jewish and Arab city. And it hasn't been so nice the past a few weeks. Now it's calmed down, but in the peak of the action, there was some bad things going around, some tension between Jews and Arabs, and of course the sirens and rockets hovering over our heads. But we must put it in perspectives. Us Jews in Tel Aviv are the ones who are having the easy side of this story. Of course, I can't even start to imagine what people are going through on the border with Gaza and in Gaza itself, where things were really, really bad once again. So it's been, we're having these rounds of wars every now and then. This time it was a bit more intense because of the political situation. Many people felt that Netanyahu used this escalation to his political gains on the eve of this round of battles. There was a coalition about to be formed that was about to oust him from power after 12 years. And when the fighting started, a lot of people felt that he didn't do enough to calm things down, that it actually served him. It's Israel is in a very delicate situation these days. Facing many challenges, and perhaps the biggest challenge is the fragility of life inside Israel between the different tribes. We're talking about Palestinians, we're talking about Jews, and between the Jews, you have quite a few groups that don't always coincide, don't always live together, and we're facing some tests these days.
Well, it's a great way of putting things. But there is this attempt, is there not, to somehow cobble some sort of fragile coalition here by these diverse groups, unlikely bedfellows. Do you think it's going to happen? It's interesting that the Daily Forward today, I was reading that saying, well, maybe America can learn something about the Israeli election, about putting together, I'm not exactly sure, but tell us a little about what you're trying to do here.
I guess it only shows it only shows how bad the situation in America is, if you're learning from us these days. I guess,
absolutely. Anything we can learn from anybody at this point. But go ahead.
It's funny. I mean, our documentary was released about 2 years ago, and we felt pretty lucky that we're going into an election season. Elections were declared just shortly after the documentary was released, and we felt, kind of lucky that the film is so relevant, and we're going into election season, and everybody's going to talk about the film. And little did we know that this election season will last all years. We're now in the fourth round of the election. So this is a pretty crazy situation of political instability. And the main cause for this political instability is Netanyahu himself, because what we have in Israel these days is a vast majority for right-wing parties. We're talking about around 60% of mostly right-wing parties. So in any other circumstances, they would have an easy coalition. But what Netanyahu did in the last, I would say, 5 years of his reign, is alienate so many of his partners and create a certain mistrust that no matter what he offers them these days, they simply have no way of trusting him. His words lost meanings. So this is actually what creates the ground for this weird coalition that we might be seeing forming today, which takes us from right-wing settlers until the Labour Party, and an Arab party that is about to be a part of the government for the first time. So this is a very delicate, weird coalition that we never had anything like it before. You know, there's a lot of reasons to be fearful. There's some reasons to be optimistic about it because of this strange coalition. So it will be nice to see people who are not usually sitting together sit together. But again, this is all happening because of one personality that is refusing to let go of power, which is and this is the protagonist of my documentary, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, you call your movie King Bibi the performances. Now, what do you mean by this? And you say the last 5 years. What is he now performing? What is going on? Do you say? Well, can you speculate on this? This I don't know if it's the last performance, or there's more to come. I'm sure there is, but what's going on here the last few years with this personality?
You know, the performance is not from the last few years. I wanted to make a documentary about Netanyahu. There wasn't documentaries about Netanyahu. When I started working, there was actually hardly any books, any documentaries, any films. And that was already after this guy has been something like altogether 10 years in power and 30 years in Israeli politics. So I was looking for a way to do this documentary. I knew I wouldn't get any access from him. And I didn't know if I wanted to get any access. I was thinking about his image as a politician. And for someone who grew up in the 80s and 90s in Israel, it was alongside his appearance. And from the beginning, you could remember these very unique performances. You have his 1993, one of his first performances. He goes live on TV and confesses his adultery to his newlywed wife and frames it as a political conspiracy against him. You have his appearances in the weeks that led to the Rabin assassination. And more important, Bibi Netanyahu arrived in Israel shortly from the US, by the way, where he was spent many years and learned a lot of things. And he arrives in the political arena in Israel just before the arrival of commercial TV. And this is not a coincidence. He brings a new kind of politics to Israel and to the world, a new kind of populist politics that is very much focused on the image and on his talent to use powerful images and the powerful narrative to create political power. Now, I'm not saying that he doesn't have an ideology. He has a strong ideology. He comes from a very strong ideologist house. But over the years, and that's what I try to show in the film, the idea of the image is overpowering the idea of content. And at the end, we have a prime minister, a leader that is so much focused on his image that is becoming this kind of, in my opinion, empty shell that can get all kinds of contradicting and different content, and in a way that kind of loses meaning when the only true meaning is how to regain power.
He learned a lot from the American political social media, and let's again emphasize that he was doing all of this 20 years before Trump. Yet, as far as we perceive him, he's not quite the narcissist, or comes across at least publicly, as of course Trump does. Or if you will, the pathology is somewhat controlled. That may be, at least as it comes across in the American sense. Maybe not with in Israel. There, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's important to know about Netanyahu that he has a very important American background, which is an important part of my documentary as well. And it was one of the reasons that I wanted to make this documentary, because we all knew in Israel that he has some American background, but only when I started researching I realized how fundamental this background is. Until the age of 40, Netanyahu spent almost half of his life in the US. He went to elementary school in New York. He went to high school in Cheltenham, a suburb of Philadelphia. He went to MIT, and then he became a diplomat in DC and ambassador to New York. His own father said about him in an interview from the 90s that he wished that he would control Hebrew as well as he controls English. So he's really rooted in the US, and I think he learned a lot from US politics, and he deals with the connection of politics and media from a very, very early stage. His thesis in MIT is about the computerization of the newspapers, and we're talking about 1976. So he's really focused on this thing, and he really understands it. When he's an Israeli diplomat in the 80s in the US, he meets Lillian Wilder, who is a very famous and talented speech instructor. And he learned a lot from her how to communicate his messages. When he comes to Israel and joins the political arena in the late 80s, he's already 2 steps, 3 steps, 5 steps ahead of other politicians and of the local media. And he brings a lot of methods that he learns in the US to Israeli politics. When he is first re-elected in 1996, with the help of Arthur Finkelstein, a very renowned Republican political advisor, he brings some methods to Israeli politics. This was one of the biggest revelations for me while working on the film. When you see his first reign from 1996 to 1999, he already develops some of the tools that you see with Donald Trump 20 years later, and you see with other populist leaders like the Brazilian, the Hungarian, and many other leaders that we see today who idealize Netanyahu in many ways. One of the parts that I like in the documentary is where he launches a video for the launch of the Prime Minister website in 1997. He records a video. And this is way before you have streaming on the internet. I still don't understand why he recorded the video, but I found this video. And the text that he uses in this video, he says, he talks straight to the people. He says, you don't need any commentators. You don't need anyone to tell you what to think. We can talk directly. You can get the truth from me. And when he wins a year before that, and you see the rally, and really this enthusiastic crowds chanting his name, calling him a king, you see signs against the leftist media. I think Netanyahu, and to some extent Berlusconi in Italy at this time, is doing similar things, but Netanyahu maybe even more sophisticated. He's putting the foundation for a media-based populist reign that will become a global phenomenon 20 years later. And he already understands the fundamentals of social media, the way he talks, the way he communicates with the people. He already understands what social media, without, of course, knowing what social media. He already understands the power of the messages and how to communicate with people. But at this stage in the 90s, he still tries to be part of the establishment as well. He's playing a complicated game. He's doing his own thing, but he's already cautious in the way he treats the Israeli establishment. He still wants to be part of it. He still wants to convince the liberals, the leftists, to support him. When he comes back in 2009, he's still this trying to present this centrist, balanced leader. And in 2015, things begin to change radically and deteriorate. 2015, Bibi wins the election against all odds. And he feels that he's done it alone, and he's doing it while using very extreme populist methods, attacking the media, attacking the left, attacking the Arabs, creating this kind of divergence. And this, I think, changes something in him. He forms the most right-wing coalition he ever had. He radicalizes, and when Trump is elected a year later, this really changes things, pushes things for he really doesn't have anyone to stop him anymore. So I think going back to your question, I hope this answer wasn't too long.
I understand.
I think they have a lot of similar methods, Bibi and Trump, but Bibi, of course, is much more sophisticated. He's much more knowledgeable. Is in a way a true intellectual. He's a very intelligent guy. Not that I think Trump is intelligent too, but I wouldn't say he's knowledgeable in history and politics, etc. So Netanyahu is more sophisticated. He's more balanced, and that's why he's more used in power, because he knew how to compromise. He knew how to change his ways in when he needed to. But at the end of the day, with the back to the wall, he uses the same methods.
Yeah. What about the impact of the loss of his brother? What year was that again? Now in the Entebbe raid. What do you think? Did that do something to him politically and psychologically? Impact on his whatever you want to call dogmatism, ideological framework? Do you think what impact did that have?
Yeah, I don't think it affected him ideologically. I think Bibi's father, Ben Zion, was a very, I don't know if known, but he was a very politically active historian, very, very right-wing. So he taught his children his point of view, which was pretty radical already. So they already had a firm ideological approach to Zionism, to Arabs, to Israel, to the conflict, which is very harsh. It doesn't see any room for compromise. He really believes that Israel will always live on its sword, and that the only solution is to show a constant strength. So
would you compare him to any other previous Israeli politician, Begin, Jabotinsky?
Yeah.
I mean, in the
he's a right wing. Yeah, he's
within that
Begin
framework.
and Jabotinsky. It's interesting to think about it because it's Begin and Jabotinsky. They are basically the only right-wing leaders before him. The right wing in Israel is very, very loyal to its leaders. They don't change him. They don't change, unlike the Labor or the left. They don't change them every year or every failure. So yeah, Netanyahu is is continuing the line of Jabotinsky and Begin, but of course he has his own attributes that are very different as well. He takes from Jabotinsky, I think, some ideas from the liberal right and the Iron Wall, which is a fundamental concept of the Israeli right wing, and he takes from Begin the connection of the Mizrahis in Israel to the right wing and the more traditionalist and the religious people in Israel. He strengthened, Begin invented this alliance of religious people in Israel and the right wing, and he takes this element and makes it stronger and stronger and stronger, actually. Going back to his brother, it affected him deeply. They were very close. I'm sure it was very painful for him, the loss of his brother. But in somehow paradoxical way, this is what opened up the stage for Bibi. Because before that, Netanyahu was doing his, he just finished his master's in business school in MIT, and he planned a career in business. He was starting to work in the BCG, in the Boston Consultant Group, with Mitt Romney, by the way, at the same time, in the mid 70s, and that was his plan. And when his beloved brother dies and becomes a hero because he was a hero, and also because his father and the family worked very hard to preserve the narrative of him as a hero. So there was a lot of there was some controversial about this story later as well, but that's the whole different story. Bibi finds himself talking in different conferences about his brother and about politics, and about history. That's where his talent is being discovered, and that's how he creates a name for himself. So, in a way, the death of his brother was his opportunity to become a politician.
Right. Interesting. Okay, that really explains a lot. So you're part of, could we say it loosely, the secular, cultural, liberal left of Israel here? I mean,
guilty
to categorize as we sociologists do here, but and a terrific artist and a man of peace and love and so on. As you look at what's happening to your country and the possibility of this again, this new government being formed, where are you at? What are you trying to, and your fellow Israelis, like-minded Israelis, what are you all thinking? What can you do? Because we look over here at America and we realize, well, there's things we can do too to put certain pressures on, and yet it gets very, very complicated because the left elements of the left over here tend to overreach, in my opinion, and are not very helpful. We also have, of course, the Christian evangelicals who are mixing in your politics. I know you know that I did a wonderful interview with Maya Genstein on that, Till Kingdom Come, and Morlosi as well, the impact of AIPAC. So what are you all trying to do here? How are you going to try to survive and turn this around a bit and keep us from having more confrontations, never-ending ones, as Netanyahu's father would have it?
Yeah. Well, personally, I'm not very optimistic. I think this place is becoming, we have our islands of, I mean, you in the US, at least you have power changing every few years. Over here, the left hasn't been in power for about 20 years, and it's really difficult to see it changing. The demographics here is becoming more and more right-wing, more and more religious. it's pretty difficult. This government that brings some elements of the left into power is very rare. And I don't think it will happen again once Netanyahu disappears, because this is really a personal thing. Otherwise, the right will rule single-handedly without involving centrist or leftist parts. We're telling our stories. We're living our life here and the community here. The main issue here is still the Palestinian issue. Netanyahu, in his 12 years in power, managed to push it aside and try to convince us that this is not an issue. He made some achievements. He made the peace with the UAE, etc., and he had Trump as an ally that was ignoring the Palestinians altogether. But now this thing is proving again that it's here to stay, and this conflict, it in a way it has no solution, because there's two national nations here sharing a land, and to find a solution, you need to be very creative, you need to be very emphatic, you need to be very delicate. This is not the approach you see from leaders in both sides, actually. But Israel being the strong side, I would put more responsibility on our side. And it's hard to see a change. The only thing that can make you a little bit optimistic is that people here, the majority of people, right or left, religious or secular, want to live their lives. And Netanyahu, at the end of the day, the secret of his success was a certain stability he brought to Israel in the last decade. We're paying a price now for the certain deficit he put us into, but he also found a way to bring the different tribes together and make them live together with tension, without resolving the big issues, but with this kind of a free market approach. You do have a lot of Arabs who are more involved in Israeli life, etc. So there are different sides of the stories, and at the end of the day, people, the ordinary man, just wants peace. He wants to provide for his family, and he doesn't go out in the morning looking for violence or for war. But yeah.
No, that's. I think you realize it. You just said something so profound. You're absolutely right. The average Israeli Arab wants that, and yet the contradiction is the continuation of these policies on the right are not going to bring that about. So there has to be some sort of transformation. There just has to be. I mean, it's not absolutely deterministic, but
yeah.
But the two-state solution is not totally dead, right? I mean, or is?
Well, I mean, look, it will be very difficult to revive it, because the situation on the ground is with the settlements is that it's hard to see the two states, and I think to start with, as for the Palestinians, it's a very big compromise, the two states. On the other hand, when we see the violence erupting here between Jews and Arabs, you think about a one-state solution, and you ask yourself, even if it's definitely it's the moral solution, right. But is it feasible? You don't really have examples historically or around the world for multinational states. You have the example of former Yugoslavia, which is not a good example. So none of the solutions are really feasible, but this doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and look for one. You're having new solutions now that are more creative. There's a new initiative of one land for two people, trying to think of some kind of a confederation, understanding that both people feel an emotional connection to this land, to the whole of it.
Right.
And
Family
maybe,
circle too, right? Wasn't there a parents' family circle of Palestinians and
yeah,
Israelis?
and
That's
you have different initiatives of people who, yes, I mean, for me, this is the basic idea: being empathic before asking who's right and who's wrong and what is the solution. Understanding that there's someone on the other side.
right.
You know, I became a father this year, and this
Mazel
the
tov.
last so that, thank you. And with this round of rockets, we were sitting with our baby in the safe room, and I was thinking about her naturally, but I was also thinking about in a more intense way about people in Gaza who don't have a safe room, who don't have a roof over their head, who don't have running water, who don't have electricity, and it really breaks your heart. So I think the first thing to do is understand the human beings on the other side, and they're human beings just like us, and then start breaking our head and finding solutions how we can share this land, because it cannot go on much longer the way it is now.
No, and that's again the role, as you pointed out, for the writer, for the artist, for the filmmaker, for the.
It's a limited role, I feel. You know, we can
We need to
point
do that.
we can point it out, but we cannot
Let
really have a solution.
Let me ask you a couple of fast, sort of little questions. Is there a refusnik movement in the Israeli army? I know I interviewed this many years ago, Guy Grossman, a significant. I don't know if you know the name, but is there anything within the army itself that reflects perhaps a resistance to this? And tell me also what you think American policy, and particularly the American progressive left, perhaps can offer here as we watch what's happening. And finally, perhaps, what is the role of Hamas? You say again, you know, Netanyahu used them also as a way of continuing, but they're using the right as well, right? So perhaps you could touch on some of those issues.
Yeah, well, start from the end. Hamas is very convenient for Netanyahu because they have a hardline approach, and they're not really looking for a solution. For them, this kind of balance of terror is a positive thing because it keeps them in power. And while things stay as they are becoming the saviors of the Palestinian people with their hardline approach, with their militant approach. And this is convenient for politicians like Netanyahu who are not looking for solutions. We're not looking for Palestinians who might take things forward and then will have more responsibility and that will result in concessions from the Israeli side. Regarding American politics and how it affects Israel, it's really complicated because we really feel now the criticism growing. And I think there's reason to be critical of Israel. There's many reasons, but on the other hand, you see so much ignorance coming from this criticism, and people talking about, let's say, this very fashionable thing of calling Israel is a colonial state, which is a real problem using these terms because there is no mother state where we can go to when we finish this, when we terminate this so-called colony. We cannot go back to France, we cannot go back to Britain, we cannot go back to all the places who were really colonial. So
well, we can take a lot in on the Upper West Side here in Manhattan. I'm just sort of semi-joking here. I understand. So you are you call yourself a progressive Zionist, or I know there's so many branches here, but you are a Zionist of sorts, right?
I'm afraid so, in a way, yeah.
Well,
I just don't see. I just don't see another solution for people at the moment. So I think we still need to find a way of making this. And there are some beautiful things happening here. So we need to change a lot of things radically, but we still need to find a way of living here and within the borders of like finding a place for the Jewish people, using the terms of the progressive left for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not always useful, I feel.
I agree. Just in the couple minutes we still have, what about the AOC Bernie Sanders proposal to restrict some of the arms that are coming to Israel? How do you feel about that?
I think if it's done rightly, it's a good idea. I think Israel should have some restrictions. I think Israel should act with more concern to the limitation of power.
What about on Hamas's side? Could some sort of deal be made with Iran to control the armaments that are going there? Should it be a little more balanced in that sense?
I think we should try and create as much as we can a better life for Palestinians in Gaza, and this might be the only way to weaken Hamas a little bit. Hamas and Iran are a problem. You know, it's a real problem. Their ideology is, you know, it eliminates the idea of Israel. It eliminates the idea of our existence. So it's a real problem. But I think the Israeli policy is only strengthening Hamas over the years. So we need to find a way of working with the more moderate fractions of the Palestinians. Regarding Iran, that's a more complicated question. I think we need to work with the U.S. with the international community, but we also need to remember that the ideology of this regime is very murderous, and not only towards Israel but towards its own people. So
I understood.
We need to be cautious there as well.
Understood. In the last minute, your documentary has really been received well, hasn't it, in Israel? And what are you working on? What are you working on now, if you can? I know you guys always never want to tell, but
no. I'm working on a few projects.
Okay.
One of them that I'm editing now is about a guy who comes from an Orthodox family in the north, and he became the cannabis king of Israel. And he created an app called Telegrass that transformed the drug business in Israel completely. And he's now under trial for being the head of a crime organization. But he's actually this kind of a vegan weed lover. And it's a very complicated story that, you know, it's a true crime story. On one hand, religious, like Shtisel-like story. On the other hand, it's going to be a great film.
I'm sure. Well, I think Barak Hyman is also working on something with the Orthodox. So maybe that's the fertile. Yes. Listen, Dan, we could go on and on. This has been terrific. It's been so enlightening. Thank you so very, very much for doing what you did in this movie and continue on with your work. And again, thank you so very much. Stay safe and be of good cheer. Things will get better.
And whoever watches our interview can catch the movie on the usual platforms on the Amazon.
And there'll be numerous clips as well, the trailer and so on. It's fabulous. It's fabulous. Thank you again,
James. It was fascinating. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you so very, very much for watching us today on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos. We'll see you again next week on The Radical Imagination.
מבקש לפנות אל בנימין נתניהו. אחרי שירותך הצבאי אתה חזרת לארצות הברית, לקחת בחדש את האזרחות האמריקאית וגם שינית את שמך לבנג'מין ניטאי. זה יהיה לגיטימי מצד אזרחים ישראלים לחשוב שאתה שקלת להישאר בארצות הברית ולא לחזור למדינת ישראל?
אני אגיד לך משהו, אני כועס. אני לא אגיד לך שאני כועס עליך, הרי אתה בסך הכל אומר את הדברים שם, זה מרגיז אותי.
שמנסים להטיל דופי בנכונות שלי להילחם עבור המדינה הזאת, עם משפחה שהקריבה ולחמה למען המדינה הזאת.
The ultra-Orthodox parties throw their support behind Netanyahu. They use a controversial slogan which isolates Israel's Arab population and evokes criticism from the left. Its message will get stronger over the years. Bibi is good for the Jews.
כבוד הרב, יש לו עצות פנטסטיות.
זהו רגע, גבירותיי ורבותיי, כפי שאמרנו, יש לנו בשבילכם תוצאות דרמטיות.
Half a year after Rabin's assassination, the man whose campaign was deemed a lost cause by the press ends the night as the winner.
בוא תגיד לנו איזה מילה אחת. מילה אחת.
I hope he follows through on the agreement. But I don't know. I'm worried. I'm scared. And I'm sad.
מדינת ישראל יוצאת היום לדרך חדשה. אנחנו מאמינים שכל אזרח בישראל, מה אתם צועקים על התקשורת? הרי אמר, לא, הרי אמר אחד משרי הממשלה הזאת, הבחירות האלה הוכיחו בצורה ברורה שיש אלוהים בשמיים.
Netanyahu's tactics are rejected by many in Israel and around the world, but they are accepted and admired by others. So far, Bibi's political gambles are paying off.
This is a battle between barbaric criminals who seek to obliterate human life and decent people. This is a battle between good and evil.
Great. Welcome to our palace.
Very homey, very modest.
But thanks to you, we could paint the wall. We got the budget to paint the wall.
But I want you just to meet our boy.
This is Sarah Jared. Have you seen him?
Oh, hi, Jared. I know.
That's the son-in-law.
Yeah, I know since you were a kid.
President Trump's visit to the Prime Minister's residence is aired live. The excitement of the event exposes moments that are usually hidden from the public.
Honored to meet you.
This is my son.
Hello. Hello. Honored to meet you. I'm a big fan of both of you. I heard about you so much from my mother. She talks about you all the time.
Yeah.
And you know, I can relate a lot to what Baron is going through because I've been in his age in my dad's first term. They were doing satires on me when I was 3 years old.
Yeah, 5 years old. Yeah.
They're waiting for us.
We don't know what Bibi and Trump discussed privately. Maybe they mentioned Vincent Harris. After his success with Netanyahu, he went on to join the Trump team. After bringing America to Israel, Bibi is bringing Israel to America. His attacks on the establishment and the media, which started in the 1990s, are now a trademark of top politicians, especially the leader of the world's greatest superpower.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Like Trump, Bibi's actions lead to a clash with the law. His endless obsession with his image and the media threaten Netanyahu's very survival. He's suspected of attempting to bribe media tycoons to improve their coverage of him and his family.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now in the midst of a major political scandal. He's under investigation for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, and things may have just gotten a whole lot worse.
The police recommend that he and Sarah be indicted, but Bibi knows that regardless of what they find, he can always tell his supporters his version of events.
רבים מכם שואלים, מה יהיה? אז אני רוצה להרגיע אתכם. לא יהיה כלום, כי אני יודע את האמת. לוקחים אנשים שטוענים שהם ביצעו איזה עבירה, מכניסים אותם למעצר, מהלכים עליהם אימים, אומרים להם, החיים שלכם נסתיימו. אתם רוצים לחלץ בזה? יש מוצא אחד. לחלכו על נתניהו. כבר אי אפשר להתעלם מהמסע המתוזמן. אז אני רוצה להגיד לכל המקליטים והמקליטות והמפיצים והמפיצות והשדרים למיניהם, אני רוצה להגיד לכם, תתביישו לכם. אז אני רוצה להגיד לכם, אני איתכם, הם לא יתישו אותי. הם רק מעצימים את הנחישות שלי. אז אם אתם רוצים לקבל את האמת ולשמוע את האמת, כנסו לאתר הפייסבוק שלי. פה תשמעו את האמת. שבת שלום.
Public speaking is an art. Like any art, it requires dedication and practice. If you follow the 7-step program, you will taste the joys that fearless speaking can bring, the magic of getting a response, the pleasure of tapping your own creativity, the power of persuasion, the overwhelming rightness one feels when speaking with an objective and from conviction. But this is only a beginning. It is my fervent hope that the 7 steps to fearless speaking becomes an ongoing resource for you, and that you continue to grow and to revel in your newfound voice.
نصير عيلة حب عيلة إسرائيل